Hello, and welcome to the webinar on Oracle to Postgres migration, expectation versus reality. I'm Christina Cardozo with IT Ops Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. First, we will be conducting a live Q&A after today's presentation. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you may submit them through the Control Panel's Questions tab. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the IT Ops Times website in about 24 hours after the event. We will also be giving away two $50 gift cards to lucky attendees today. You'll have to stay with us through the entire webinar in order to be eligible, and I'll announce that at the end. Here at IT Ops Times, we're seeing more and more enterprises begin to migrate to Postgres, but they can be faced with a lengthy and challenging process. Today's webinar will look at the top challenges, total cost of ownership, how long migration takes, and more. Here to discuss this further is Rami Hodnig, Head of Content for Strata. Rami brings 25 years of experience in the software industry with a passion for technology in all its forms. He has held a variety of roles from developer through product manager to product marketing in different industries from mobile to cloud. Rami now uses his role managing content at Strata to spread the word about how cloud and on-prem technologies meet to provide more value to software vendors. Now to get things started, I'll turn it over to you, Rami.
Great, thanks. So I'd like to welcome everyone here to this webinar today. And as mentioned, there will be a few questions during the course of the webinar, and we're happy to get your input on those. So to get started, so we see that Postgres is catching up to Oracle. Looking at this trends graph from DB Engines, we see that there's a definite migration away from Oracle to Postgres. And in fact, if we extrapolate these graphs forward, then we'll see that within a few years, sometime around 2025, Postgres is going to overtake Oracle as the #1 database in the industry. So we created this survey because migration is a strategic decision. It's a strategic move that does involve a significant investment in time and resources. So we ran this Oracle to Postgres migration survey so that we could give companies a frame of reference of what to expect during the migration. And in the survey, we asked 200 IT executives from two different groups. The first group was a group of companies who were planning their migration from Oracle to Postgres. And the second group was a group of companies that were either in the process of their migration or they had completed their migration. And we asked them similar questions in the survey and wanted to compare what companies expect before they migrate as compared to what actually happens after they migrate. So we wanted to make sure that our respondents had the right technical background and also were in decision-making roles so that you can see the breakdown of responsibilities and roles that our respondents had, put them in those positions. Let's dive right in and see some of the key findings from the survey. So the first thing we found is that there is an urgency to migrate, and once companies do make this decision, they are in a hurry to migrate at least 10% of their Oracle database footprint. The top drivers tipping the scales for such a decision, you might think cost reduction is the top one, but we found that digital transformation is really the #1 driver, with cost reduction, of course, a close second. And then we see companies moving to the public cloud, that being a driver also for migrating from Oracle to Postgres. Cost reduction is also the #1 benefit that companies see, but not quite to the extent that they expect they will see it before migrating. Looking at time factors, we see that most companies do complete their migration within the time they allocate or estimate for it, or less. So that's a positive note. What happens after the companies finish their migration? How do they end up consuming Postgres? And we find the most common way is as a managed service. So let's dive deeper and see some stats here. So looking at the before group, the ones who were just planning their migration, we found that they were all planning to migrate at least 10% of their Oracle footprint over the next 12 months. And we see the larger peak here, 86% of them planning to migrate more than 25% of their Oracle footprint, with 36% actually planning to migrate over 50% of their Oracle footprint over the next 12 months. And if we compare that to the after group, the ones who had completed their migration, we found that 91% of those respondents had already migrated more than 25% of their Oracle databases to Postgres. So there was an alignment there between the before and after group. And now we get to our first poll question. And here we'd like to know about, in the transitions from Oracle to Postgres, what options best describe your company status? Are you not planning to migrate to Postgres at all? Have you decided to migrate but haven't started planning yet? Are you planning the migration? Are you executing it now? Or have you maybe completed your migration from Oracle to Postgres? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer those questions. Okay, just a couple more seconds here. And let's move on and find out what about the triggers and the benefits that companies see from a migration. So, as I mentioned before, the top triggers for a migration, though you might think it would be the pressure to reduce costs, we found that that's actually the number two trigger driving a migration like this, albeit it is a close second. But the top driver is a company's desire for a digital transformation. Companies want to become more agile, more innovative, have their operations streamlined with automation and DevOps. So really the digital transformation, we found that to be the top trigger. And what about benefits? So looking at benefits before a migration and after a migration, so really the same three benefits were rated as the top three before and after, but there was a difference in the extent to which they were rated like that. So after companies did complete their migrations, additional benefits did come to light. We see an improvement in stability, a support for developer innovation using Postgres, and of course there's a reduction in the complexity of managing the different licenses with Postgres using open source licenses. Let's have a look at how costs are affected, the total cost of ownership. So we actually found that most companies are positively surprised with a greater reduction in TCO than they had expected. About 50% of the companies planning to migrate were expecting to see a reduction in TCO of at least 20%, but in fact 68% of the companies who migrated saw a reduction of 20% or more. And if we look at the 50% mark, there's a significant difference there. Many more companies saw a reduction of 50% or more in their TCO than companies that expected to see such a reduction. Let's look a little bit at the migration process. Let's look at timelines. So regarding the time to complete the migration, 26% of the companies expected the migration to take 6 months or less. 75% of them expected it to take 7 months or more, and 40% expected it to take more than a year. Now, in practice, after migrating, we found that more than 2/3 of the companies completed the migration as planned or sooner. So there's a positive note there. And we see something similar with downtime. So those companies planning a migration, 14% of them expected to have less than 2 hours of downtime. 57% expected to have 6 or more hours of downtime, with 21% expecting more than a day of downtime. And similarly here, we found that 2/3 of the companies managed to complete their migration with the amount of downtime they had anticipated or less. So there's a positive note regarding timelines and downtime. And we now reach our second poll question. And we'd like to know how much of your Oracle footprint will eventually be migrated to Postgres, whether you're just planning or in the process or have completed your migration. So let's take a few seconds for that. Seems like we have most of the answers in. Just another couple of seconds there. Okay, let's move on now. So we've talked about several things. Let's now see what challenges companies anticipated and what they actually experienced in their migration. So before migrating, the top 3 challenges that companies anticipated are minimizing downtime, migrating data, and reliability of the databases. But once they completed their migrations, so they experienced these challenges, but to a lesser extent than what they had anticipated. And then instead of those challenges, new challenges seem to, or maybe less expected challenges seem to pop up for these companies as day 2 operations for Postgres turned out to be more challenging than expected, and supporting hybrid cloud implementations and self-service provisioning, those factors also turned out to be more challenging than companies had expected them to be. So that leads us into how companies actually consume their Postgres databases. And we looked at 3 different options here: the do-it-yourself, install your own vanilla open source Postgres database. There were enterprise, commercial enterprise products, or managed services, whether on-prem or in the public cloud. And we found here that there were significant gaps between what companies initially planned to do and what they ended up doing. And we see that while 42% of companies planning a migration did anticipate or did plan to use a commercial enterprise product, in the end, only 29% ended up using one of these. And the vast majority of companies ended up using a managed service to consume Postgres. And this takes us into our 3rd poll question. And here we'd like to know how you plan to deploy your Postgres clusters. Are you going to be on-prem, on a single public cloud? Are you going to be multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, or something else? So let's take a few seconds for that. So it looks like we have all the answers in. We'll just give another couple of seconds in case anyone's still considering. Okay, let's move on. So maybe this is the time to tell you a little bit about Stratascale's enterprise database platform. What we do with our platform is really simplify database operations in a number of different ways. For example, we let you or your users spin up databases in minutes pretty much with a single click using our self-service portal or using APIs. Our automated lifecycle management simplifies IT administration tasks while giving you better control and governance over all of those databases that you're having to manage. Our platform gives you a single pane of glass view across all of the data centers and edge locations, giving you kind of a consolidated view over all the databases under your control. And using public cloud APIs, we let you implement advanced DevOps and automation using the same APIs that you would on the cloud. So maybe this is the time to open up the floor for any questions.
Great, thanks, Romeo. So if you have any questions, again, you can submit them now during the control panel's questions tab. While you guys are doing that, I will announce the winners of the $250 gift cards. Our first winner is Allie Crawford, and our second winner is Karl Marx. Thank you guys for joining us today. So now to get to the questions. We are complementing between a few Postgres deployment options. Do-it-yourself is definitely a big concern. What was the most popular way you found from your survey?
So in the survey, as you just saw, we did ask about 3 different options. The do-it-yourself option, installing just plain vanilla open source Postgres, using an enterprise implementation, or a managed service. And this was really one of the clear cases in which reality didn't meet the expectation. We found that while many companies expected to use an enterprise commercial product, they found those too complicated to manage. And many of them ended up using a managed service to install and maintain their Postgres database. This does reflect on companies' realization that once they migrate their databases to Postgres, they still need to manage, monitor, and maintain all of those databases. And this is where a managed service like StrataScale does provide real value to these companies.
Great. So one of our attendees is trying to figure out how to plan the migration and how long it's going to take. So can you, share a little bit more insight into that, Rami?
Yeah. So our survey showed that companies expected, about a quarter of the companies expected the migration to take 6 months or less. 3/4 of them, of course, expected it to take 7 months or more, but 40% were planning of a migration to take a year or more. And what it's actually going to take in each particular case is really going to depend on how many databases you're migrating, the amount of data in them. But I think the important thing to note here is that we can be optimistic in terms of migration time. We found that 2/3 of the companies had a good estimation of how long it would take, or even it even took less time than they anticipated. So there's an optimistic point there.
To what extent, do the costs go down after migrating?
Yeah, so there's a significant cost reduction here. In the survey, we found that for 70% of companies that migrated, the TCO went down, TCO being total cost of ownership, went down by at least 20%. Now, for about 20% of those companies, TCO actually went down by over 50%. And maybe again, the interesting fact here is that here again, the reality was actually better than the expectation, because the TCO went down more than companies actually expected that it would.
Great. And now for teams that are concerned about leaving the Oracle SLA, how would you recommend they overcome these challenges?
Well, we did ask companies who were concerned about that in the survey. What was interesting to see was that in the before group, only 15% of the respondents indicated that day 2 operations are a challenge. But when we asked that question to the after group, this number almost doubled. It seems that as long as Oracle is in the picture, companies are confident that they can manage the maintenance and management and monitoring of their databases quite easily. But what happens the day after is certainly something to consider. And companies do need to consider that they're making a significant and strategic change moving from Oracle to Postgres. Now, for enterprise environments, the StrataScale platform does offer a similar set of benefits to what you might get through an Oracle SLA, by giving a robust set of management features that do eliminate a big chunk of the operations that your IT administrators would have to do. And if you're on the cloud, then AWS RDS service also is a great alternative that gives you a similar set of benefits.
Great. Now, did you find any challenges associated with the operations part of Postgres that customers ran into after their migration was completed?
So yeah, there were challenges with self-service provisioning, day 2 operations. So certainly there were those challenges. And again, this is where a managed service really can make those aspects of managing Postgres much easier.
Great. Now, what about AWS Aurora? Do you have any, comparison points on which way is the best to go between that and Postgres?
So we didn't really ask our respondents about Aurora in particular. So that's a question that I would have to take offline.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question. Do we have any script or something to run in Oracle DB to make sure all objects will be supported in the migration of Postgres, before they plan and know that they're 100% sure they're going to move forward with Postgres?
Well, there are tools that help automate some of the migration from Oracle to Postgres. And really, before you embark on a migration like this, you need to evaluate these tools, do some tests, check what aspects of your database can automatically be migrated from Oracle to Postgres. Something to keep in mind is that Oracle does add some proprietary functionality on top of the standard SQL. So if you're using any of that functionality in your databases, you might have trouble migrating that, and some of your applications which use any of that functionality will have to be reworked. So it's not going to be a completely automatic procedure. There will be some manual tweaking that you'll have to do depending on how much of that functionality you'll use.
Great. Now, before we go, I just want to quickly throw it back to you for one final thought or key takeaway you'd like to leave our attendees with today.
Yeah, so maybe the key takeaway would be that plan your migration very carefully. This is a strategic decision, and you're going to invest a lot of time and resources in it. Know that the reality that you'll encounter does not always meet what you expect. And keep in mind the surprises that came up in our survey. And to really see all of the surprises, know that we will be sending you a link to the full report so you can see all the data and insights that came from running the survey. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us today.
Great, and thank you for a great presentation. Again, that was Rami Handig, Head of Content for StrataScale, and I'd like to thank StrataScale for sponsoring today's event, as well as attendees for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Christina Cardoza with IT Ops Times.